Welcome to a journey through time, where water writes history and rivers become the architects of human destiny. Today, with the story of us, we're exploring how these liquid arteries didn't just sustain life, they created it, shaped it, and transformed scattered tribes into the greatest civilizations our world has ever known. Picture this: you're standing on the edge of a vast desert, the sun beating down mercilessly, when suddenly you see it, a ribbon of green cutting through the endless brown. That green line? It's not just vegetation, it's the birthplace of writing, the foundation of empires, the cradle of human innovation. That's the power of rivers. And today we're diving deep into their extraordinary stories. From the predictable floods of ancient Egypt to the sacred waters of the Himalayas, from the first cities rising along Mesopotamian banks to the isolated development of Chinese civilization, rivers have been humanity's greatest teachers, providers, and challengers. So let's embark on this voyage through liquid history. I'm your host, Madison Reed, and let's get started. Let's start with perhaps the most famous river civilization partnership in human history. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile. And once you understand this river's rhythm, you'll see why that phrase has echoed through millennia. Imagine you're an ancient Egyptian farmer, and your entire world revolves around a river that the people simply called the sea. The Nile wasn't just water, it was a living calendar, a natural timekeeper more reliable than the moon itself. Every year, like clockwork, this magnificent river would begin its annual performance. Starting in late June, the waters would start to rise, swelling with the rains and melting snows from the distant Ethiopian highlands, thousands of miles away. By late October, the river would retreat. But here's the magic: it left behind something more precious than gold: nutrient-rich black silt, nature's perfect fertilizer, spread across the riverbanks like a blessing from the gods. This created a natural rhythm that defined Egyptian life for thousands of years. From late June to late October, inundation season, when the river claimed the land. From October to February, growth season, when farmers planted their crops in the rich, moist soil. From February to late June, harvest season, when the fruits of this partnership between human ingenuity and river predictability were gathered. But here's what's truly remarkable: this wasn't always the case. Before 10,000 years ago, northeastern Africa looked completely different. The Sahara wasn't the barren desert we know today. It was a rich savanna, teeming with life. But as the glaciers retreated and the climate changed, this green paradise began to dry up. Around 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, the people of the northeastern Sahara found themselves with a choice: adapt or perish. They chose adaptation, migrating toward the Nile Valley and transforming their entire way of life. These Paleolithic hunter-gatherers became something entirely new. They became farmers, settlers, the first Egyptians. By 7000 BCE, they were building settlements and mastering agriculture. It was a complete civilizational transformation, all because of water. 3,000 years later, around 4241 BCE, these river-adapted people recorded one of the earliest known dates in human chronology. Think about that for a moment. While much of the world was still struggling with basic survival, the Egyptians were creating formal calendars, keeping detailed records, building the foundations of what would become one of history's most enduring civilizations. How did they do it? The secret weapon was elegantly simple: the Nilometer. Picture a tall reed planted in the riverbank mud, carefully notched to mark the flood's highest point. By counting the days between peak floods, early Egyptian farmers had created the most accurate calendar available at the time, one based on Earth's orbit and axial tilt, rather than the inconsistent lunar cycles other cultures relied on. This river-based precision allowed something unprecedented in human history: predictable abundance. When you can plan your agricultural cycles with mathematical certainty, you can support larger populations, create food surpluses, and free people up for specialization. Some could become priests, others artisans, others administrators. The reliable Nile made possible the pyramids, the pharaohs, and a civilization that lasted nearly 3 millennia until the death of Cleopatra. The Nile's influence stretched over more than 4,000 miles, the second longest river in the world, fed not just by Ethiopian rains, but by watersheds extending as far south as Uganda. This vast network created a biological and cultural superhighway that connected distant regions and diverse peoples under one flowing banner. Now, let's travel from the predictable rhythms of the Nile to a very different river story, one of innovation, inequality, and the birth of urban civilization itself. Welcome to ancient Mesopotamia and the Euphrates River, where humanity took its next giant leap forward. Around 5,500 years ago, something unprecedented happened in southern Mesopotamia. A settlement called Uruk began to grow along the banks of the Euphrates River, and it didn't just become big, it became the first true city in human history. But Uruk's story begins with understanding how cities emerge at all. As human populations grew and resources accumulated, some communities gained advantages that set them apart. Take Çatalhöyük in southern Anatolia. It wasn't just blessed with fertile farmland, but possessed something every Neolithic person coveted: obsidian, that volcanic glass that created the sharpest blades of the ancient world. Çatalhöyük's residents likely traded this precious resource across vast distances, reaching all the way to Mesopotamia. Or consider Jericho, one of the world's oldest continuous human habitations. It started during the Natufian period around an unfailing well, a perpetual water source that transformed a simple settlement into a town of about 3,000 people 9,000 years ago. But these were just the opening acts. The real drama was unfolding in southern Mesopotamia, where geography was about to midwife civilization as we know it. Uruk started as a port on the Euphrates River, and like many settlements in the region, it depended entirely on elaborate irrigation systems. But here's where the story gets fascinating. Uruk's expansion coincided with a period of climate change marked by increasingly arid conditions. As surrounding villages struggled with drought, people began migrating toward cities with robust irrigation infrastructure. Around 5,500 years ago, Uruk housed about 10,000 people on opposite banks of the Euphrates. But within just 200 years, something extraordinary happened. The river's course changed, flowing around the city like a protective moat, and the population exploded to around 50,000 inhabitants, crammed into just 2.5 square kilometers. To put this in perspective, 50,000 people might not sound impressive today, but in 3,500 BCE, Uruk was likely the largest human settlement that had ever existed. It was a monument to human organization, a testament to what happens when river management, agricultural surplus, and social innovation converge. What did this first city look like? Archaeological records from the era of King Gilgamesh, yes, the legendary hero of the world's earliest written epic, paint a vivid picture. Imagine approaching Uruk from the desert. First, you'd see formidable walls built from burned bricks rising from the flat plains. As you drew closer, you'd notice canals extending toward harbors and farmlands, the arteries that kept this urban heart pumping. Inside the city, you'd find two grand temple complexes, massive stone testimonies to the power of religious or royal figures who could command the labor of thousands, including numerous slaves. The city was divided into 3 distinct zones: urban areas packed with workshops, inns, and shrines, connected by narrow streets and winding alleyways; garden zones with lush, irrigated green spaces; and field zones where agriculture met architecture. The precinct dedicated to the goddess Ishtar added a divine dimension to this very earthly achievement. But Uruk's influence extended far beyond its walls. Archaeological discoveries of Uruk-style goods, as far away as Anatolia and Egypt, reveal extensive trading networks. Uruk's merchants didn't just trade locally, they created one of the first global economies, with the Euphrates River serving as their highway to the world. And here's where the story takes a turn that still shapes our world today. Around 5,000 years ago, The temples of Eanna and Uruk gave birth to writing. Not poetry, not stories, but inventories. Clay tablets listing quantities of livestock, textiles, and human resources. The earliest writing wasn't inspired by beauty or philosophy. It was born from the practical need to manage wealth and power. This wasn't accidental. The complexity of managing a city of 50,000 people, coordinating irrigation systems, organizing trade networks, and controlling resources required a technology that memory alone couldn't provide. Writing became the essential tool for the wealthy and powerful to track the expanding flows of energy and resources at their disposal. But those early clay tablets tell us something darker about this urban revolution. They reveal profound social inequality, powerful networks of rulers, aristocrats, and bureaucrats controlling information and resources, commanding the labor of vast populations of slaves, farmers, and artisans. The birth of cities wasn't just about human achievement, it was about the birth of systematic inequality, with the river serving as both foundation of wealth and the means of its concentration. From the interconnected world of Mesopotamian trade, let's journey to a civilization that developed in remarkable isolation, ancient China, where geography itself shaped a completely different approach to human organization and cultural development. China's story is fundamentally a story of space and separation. This massive landmass, with its diverse topography, climate, and vegetation, is best understood as four distinct regions, each playing a crucial role in Chinese civilization's unique evolution. The northern grasslands, stretching along the edges of the Mongolian plateau, were perfect for pastoral nomadism. Here, powerful nomadic confederations like the Xiongnu and Yuezhi thrived, and their constant interaction with sedentary farming cultures added dynamism and tension to early Chinese history. These weren't just distant neighbors, they were integral to the Chinese story, forcing innovation, military development, and diplomatic sophistication. The southern regions, characterized by hilly terrain and mountain ranges with heavy rainfall, became the heartland of rice cultivation. This crop would sustain millions of East and Southeast Asians, creating agricultural abundance that supported dense populations and complex societies. The isolation of the southwestern tropical forests was only broken during the Qin and Han periods, when Chinese civilization finally established contacts with South and Southeast Asia. But the most dramatic geographical feature was the fourth region, the mountainous and arid West. Imagine trying to communicate or trade across the Himalayas, the Karakoram, or the Tian Shan Mountains. These weren't just physical barriers. They were civilizational walls, harsh deserts, and towering peaks that created one of the most isolated major civilizations in human history. This isolation was both blessing and curse. On one hand, it protected early Chinese states from competition with Western civilizations, allowing them to develop distinctive ideas about government, social structure, and the relationship between individual and community. Unlike the Mesopotamians, who had to constantly adapt to external pressures and influences, early Chinese civilization could focus inward, creating uniquely Chinese approaches to political and social organization. But at the heart of this vast, diverse landscape were the eastern alluvial plains, the region where most of Chinese history would unfold. These densely populated plains were where the earliest farming cultures emerged, where the first cities were built, and where all of China's ancient dynasties would center their power. The eastern plains tell a different river story than the Nile or Euphrates. Rather than being dominated by a single great river, this region was shaped by multiple waterways working in concert, creating a complex network of agricultural and transportation opportunities. These rivers provided the foundation for intensive agriculture that could support massive populations, but they also required sophisticated management and coordination. Unlike Egypt, where the Nile's predictable flooding created natural abundance, or Mesopotamia, where irrigation was primarily about managing scarce water resources, China's eastern plains required managing abundance, controlling floods, directing water flow, and coordinating agricultural activities across vast areas. This geographical reality pushed early Chinese states toward internal integration rather than external expansion. It wasn't until late in the first millennium BCE that Chinese adventurers, diplomats, merchants, and soldiers finally managed to breach those Western barriers. When they did, it led to the First Silk Roads era, a period of significant cultural and mercantile exchange between East Asia and the rest of Eurasia. But by then, Chinese civilization had already spent millennia developing in isolation, creating institutions, philosophies, and technologies that were uniquely suited to their geographical situation. This isolation shaped Chinese approaches to governance in profound ways. Traditional Chinese states, like their counterparts elsewhere, lacked advanced communication technologies and bureaucratic mechanisms that could reach into every citizen's daily life. But the challenge was magnified by China's sheer size. Transmitting orders to distant provinces could take weeks or months, with equal delays in receiving updates. This created a system where central authority diminished with distance from major population centers, relying instead on hierarchical networks of local administrators, who often managed their territories with considerable autonomy. The Eastern Plains, however, remained the beating heart of this vast system. Their agricultural productivity, dense populations, and river-based transportation networks made them the natural center of Chinese political power. Every major dynasty would establish its capital in this region, drawing on the wealth and human resources that the river-fed plains provided. From the political rivers of Chinese civilization, let's journey to perhaps the most spiritually significant waterways in human culture, the rivers of the Himalayas, where water becomes not just life-giving, but soul-stirring. High in the Himalayas lies a remarkable region that serves as the origin point for four of Asia's most monumental rivers: the Indus, the Tsangpo, which becomes the mighty Brahmaputra, the Sutlej, and the Karnali. These aren't just geographical features. They're the liquid arteries that have shaped the spiritual, cultural, and ecological landscape of billions of people. To understand the power of water in this harsh mountain environment, imagine traveling through western Tibet's arid steppes. The landscape is dominated by dusty browns, rocky outcrops, and seemingly endless barren expanses. But then, suddenly, you encounter a small stream or marsh, and everything changes. The presence of even a tiny amount of water transforms the area into vibrant patches of green, adorned with bright flowers that seem impossibly colorful against the austere backdrop. These water sources become magnets for life. Herds of kiang, wild asses, gather at these oases. Pairs of gazelles approach cautiously. Marmots emerge from their burrows. Migratory birds like black-necked cranes, eagles, and bar-headed geese find refuge in these scarce but precious water sources. In this landscape, water doesn't just sustain life, it creates islands of life in an ocean of stone and dust. The accumulation of moisture, primarily from melting snow, does something even more remarkable. It seems to sustain the mountains themselves, covering their slopes with ice, refining their eroded characteristics, and nourishing their foundations. The natural history of the Himalayas is sculpted as much by water as by rock, a constant dialogue between liquid and solid that has been ongoing for millions of years. While the Indus and Brahmaputra define the far-reaching boundaries of this mountain system, numerous other significant rivers carve their way through these monumental landscapes. In the west, the mighty tributaries of the Punjab, the Chenab, Ravi, Sutlej, and Beas converge with the Indus before emptying into the Arabian Sea. The Yamuna, along with its tributary the Tons, represents a watershed point where waters start flowing eastward, joining the Ganga on their course to the Bay of Bengal. What makes these rivers fascinating is their diverse origins. Some are born on the southern slopes of high mountain ranges, others originate far north in Tibet and break through the primary mountain thrust. Some emerge from glaciers, others from high-altitude lakes or wetlands, and several are rejuvenated by perennial springs. Yet regardless of their particular origins, All these waterways ultimately depend on the life-giving monsoon rains brought by the clouds. But in Himalayan culture, rivers represent far more than just water sources. They embody spiritual passage and transformation. The crossing of rivers holds immense significance in myths and cultural tales, symbolizing not just physical transition from one region to another, but metaphorical passage from one phase of life to the next. Consider the legendary crossing attempts of Alexander the Great in 326 BCE. His army managed to cross the Indus, Chenab, and Ravi, each crossing a victory over both geography and psychology. But when they reached the Bays, then known as Hipphasis, something changed. Despite Alexander constructing altars and performing rituals by the riverside, his forces refused to advance further. The river had become more than a physical barrier. It had become a psychological limit, the boundary between the known and unknowable. This spiritual dimension of river crossing continues today. The Kalash tribe in Chitral, who claim descent from Alexander's soldiers, still perform animal sacrifices beside rivers, praying for safe crossings and protection from floods. It's a direct link to ancient fears and reverence that rivers inspired. The Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, traveling through the region in 645 CE, captured this mystical quality perfectly in his description of the Indus River, which he called Sindhu. He wrote of it as clear and pure, but home to mythical creatures, poisonous dragons and dangerous spirits lurking beneath its waters. According to local belief, any man attempting to cross while carrying valuable items, especially treasures like rare gems or relics of the Buddha, would find their boat engulfed by waves. Before modern engineering and bridge construction, river crossings were genuinely perilous endeavors. Makeshift footbridges constructed from logs, twigs, ropes, and vines added to the challenge rather than alleviating it. The experience of fording these mountain-fed rivers was terrifying, with swift currents and unstable crossings creating real danger of death. Yet for Hindus and Buddhists, these waterways hold profound spiritual significance. They are ultimately destined to carry mortal ashes, the final journey of the human body back to the cosmic cycle. These sacred rivers inspire both reverence and existential dread, their swift currents evoking less fear of mythical creatures and more awareness of the fluid threshold between life and death. Rivers naturally demarcate distinct ecological, political, cultural, linguistic, and ethnic realms throughout the Himalayas. Typically, Himalayan rivers flow from north to south, while the arc of the mountains extends from southeast to northwest. This intersection creates a rough grid, distinguishing regions with unique altitudinal zones that support dramatically different forms of life. A river's character transforms as it journeys downstream, starting as swift, tumultuous rapids and waterfalls in the high mountains, and gradually becoming gentle currents and serene pools as it reaches the plains below. Each section supports different ecosystems, from semi-tropical forests and grasslands at the foothills to temperate and alpine areas higher up. The river becomes a highway through biological diversity, connecting different worlds of life within a single flowing system. So, there you've it. Each river we've explored today tells a different story about the relationship between geography and human possibility. But there's a deeper thread connecting all these stories. Rivers didn't just provide water, they provided predictability in an unpredictable world. Whether it was the Nile's annual flooding, the Euphrates irrigation possibilities, the coordinated water management of China's plains, or the seasonal rhythms of Himalayan watersheds, rivers offered human societies something precious: the ability to plan, to anticipate, to build for the future rather than just survive the present. However, this predictability enabled what we might call the great human transition, the shift from reactive survival to proactive civilization building. When you can predict when floods will come, when to plant, when to harvest, when to trade, you can allocate human energy toward innovation rather than just subsistence. Along with urbanization, a silent revolution was unraveling itself: the wind. Yes, the gentle yet ever helpful wind. As humans began realizing the abundant powers of the wind, our connection with rivers waned. Interested in understanding how the wind revolution changed our relationship with rivers? Then download the Scoob app now to get access of the full story, for free. Head on to App Store or Play Store and get started.